Hello and welcome to the Conscious Club podcast. My name is Areege Tanveer Chaudhary and I am your host that welcomes you through this wondrous journey of exploring what it's like to be a human being on planet Earth at this time of rapid evolutionary change. Because if you haven't noticed already, humanity is going through an up level, whether it's through technology or whether it's through just an organic evolution of our consciousness. We are heading into a completely new era, and through this podcast, I talk about it. So if that interests you, keep listening and enjoy the ride. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Conscious Club podcast. I am filming this intro after the conversation that I just had with Selene, and I am honestly, I have no idea how to summarize everything that we talked about. I have decided that I'm going to title this episode Life is a Video Game because we definitely go very meta about existence. This is a conversation that it's very existential. We end up talking about parallel lifetimes, of whether it's possible for our consciousness to hop between one character or another. At the end, we start talking about relationships and what our philosophies are on romantic relationships and life partners that we have with in our lives. We talk about just life in general, about what we were doing here as human beings. But like I said, it's all very meta, and if you're into that, which you probably are if you're listening to me at all, then you're gonna really enjoy this podcast. Selene allows me to access a store of information within me that doesn't really come out with a lot of people unless I specifically bring it out myself, and so I just feel very grateful for it. This was a very interesting conversation. It's cool to riff with someone who thinks about existence as much as I do. And yeah, that's all I know what to say. This is a very challenging intro to film because, like I said, we touch on so many different things. Actually, near the end, Selene was saying, it's almost like we just saw a mind map of each other. I basically just went into her experience and rummaged around and saw how she perceives life, and then she just did the same for me. So yeah, have fun diving into this with us, and yeah, see you inside. Hi Selene, welcome to the Conscious Club podcast. It's always a little awkward because I talk to you before I hit record, and then I hit record and I have to be hi, welcome, as if I just started talking to you.
It's fine. It's fine.
But yeah, as I was saying pre-hitting record, I would love to start off this podcast by giving you the stage, or this episode by giving you the stage and just inviting you to share whatever it is that you want our audience to know about you, or just how would you introduce yourself? What yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, Areege and everyone else. My name is Selene. I am a multifaceted artist, a coach, and a student. My coaching paradigm kind of focuses on health and wellness as connected to spirituality, overcoming fear, taking ownership of your own life. And I also have a specialized interest in coaching actors because I've been an actor my whole life, and a lot of my art stems from performance-based stages and film, and from that I've dove into writing a little bit, poetics, just free flow journaling and screenwriting, and just cultivating characters is a really big thing for me because I think I'm so obsessed with the human experience that I love breathing life into new beings, whether that be on paper or in film or, just drawings and stuff like that.
As you brought up that actor piece, all of these things started clicking into place for me because of course the theme that I told Celine like before we started recording that like one of the themes that I wanted to focus on in this episode is like reality as a video game. And like video games have characters, and it's like, of course, what you just said about the acting piece just ties into all of that so beautifully.
Yeah.
But wow, you know, I've never actually heard because we met through like a mutual friend and then just online, and then we were just kind of cultivated our relationship by just online messages and things like that. And then more recently I feel like we like dove a little deeper into each other's worlds because Celine is it, are you doing some program or something for
Yeah, I am. So I decided to go a certification route in getting my health and life coaching certification, just so that way I could have more freedom in building an LLC and figuring out what I really want to do with cultivating a business and hopefully maybe getting like jobs or something like that. I'm not 100% sure why I did it. I just felt called to it, so I followed the calling.
yeah, yeah, but one of the results of her doing that is like she had to, I guess, work with people to, I don't know, it was part of the curriculum or something, but essentially, like, Celine became my health coach. And I think we started, I don't even know when we started, in like April or something. And that's how we like got to know each other better because of our like one-on-one collaboration in that space. And it's just all so perfect because you like came into my life at exactly the moment I needed to. A lot of what Celine has helped me with is was like what I was speaking about in the last episode with Anya. That last I mean, I guess by the time you see this, that will be a few episodes back. But like coming into the like spiritual growth through embodiment and being in the body, and like Celine has been a huge like key for me for that in my life, like to bring myself back into like my physical being. And yeah, but I kind of am feeling called to go into the acting aspect of your existence because as you know, like I've been really really deep into watching this show called Outlander, and it's like I'm so immersed in that world right now because they have so many episodes, and I've just been like it's become like part of my daily routine to like be in that world. And it almost feels as if my consciousness is like merged with that reality even though I'm here. But I just like something that I've always been really curious about, and I've been like thinking about this over the past few weeks or so, is when you're an actor, because I have zero experience with drama or acting, anything related to that. I just like when you're acting out a character, how do you find that separation between your consciousness and theirs? Because I feel like that's like when actors are good, they're just fully embodying that other person. So how do you like just I just want you to riff on that. Like what's your experience with that like consciousness merge, and yeah, whatever your thoughts are on it and insights.
So that has definitely been like a big journey for me as an actor because I started when I was like really young. So when I first began, I was just full method. Like I didn't really have the chance to develop a sense of self because I was so young. So whatever character I was playing, because I was doing back to back to back shows, I would just become that character. And I'm like, oh, I'm Kitty Verdon for the next 6 months. Oh, I am Maroon for the next 6 months. I am whoever I am playing, and like that became me. And then when I got into college, there was a whole year where they were like, okay, you can't audition for any shows, you just have to focus on classes. And when I wasn't in any shows and I didn't have a character to play, I was having like, I just had an existential crisis because I was like, oh shit, am I real? Like, I'm not a real person. I'm like, it was really, really trippy. So that bled into like a whole line where I was just uncovering myself and trying to figure out who I was and, trying on all these different people. But by the end of my college experience, what I had gained from all of that was that when you are creating a character, essentially you just step out of it. I guess you step out of yourself to give that character space to inhabit the body. So there's a lot of like techniques and stuff. I'm a big fan of meditating and um, just like visualizing myself. Like I'll leave myself. Have you ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah, all of
Okay,
it.
so I always visualize myself like at a pond, kind of like he was in that episode where they tried to steal the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I visualize my actual self sitting by that pond, and then whoever the character is kind of comes through the spirit realm, and I let them kind of take over my body. And then I wake up, like my body wakes up, but like my actual self is still there. And then I kind of move into that character, go through the scene, go through my lines, and I am that person until my workday is done, and then I meditate, and then I leave my character where my old body was and reincarnate myself. And that's kind of the way I have managed to make a distinction between the two, so I don't, lose myself in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the type of answer I was looking for because when I watch, I mean, obviously, like TV shows and movies have been a part of my life, like my entire life, but I haven't like consciously and like thought about it until recently, like as I just even as a viewer, right? Like getting so immersed in another realm, like for me, being so immersed in like the Outlander verse, I'm like, I can't even, if I'm this into it, like, if I feel like my consciousness, just as the observer, as the viewer of this play, basically, is if I feel so, like, in it, how must the actors themselves feel? And so, like, I've been doing, like, side research, side research, like, like watching all of the actors in Outland. It's like I'll watch the show and then I'll start watching like, and I do this for shows and movies outside of Outlander too, but I really enjoy watching like the interviews and
Mm.
everything that like even just my favorite is when I can find an actor on a podcast episode like as themselves so that I could just get an insight into how they deal with it because I'm like how do you the way that you described it like it is you are as an actor like a vessel for this other avatar or this other character that comes through, but I find that most people are like not into in our world right now. It's like they're not in tune with that concept even. Like no one, a lot of people aren't even thinking about consciousness. So I feel like, how do you think they? I don't know. Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it just feels like it can be really harmful, um,
Yeah.
as the vessel. Like, and even just what you said. Actually, I would love to for you to dive into that experience as well. But just really quickly, like the same theme was coming up because a few weeks ago there's a new Elvis movie coming out,
Hmm.
and the guy who plays it, Elvis, Austin Butler, there was like he did this interview where he was talking about the fact that he completely lost himself in the character Elvis and he just became Elvis embodied. And so even when that project finished up and he went on to like his next movie, there was a period of time where he was still Elvis and he like took him some time to like come out of that. And I'm just like I just can't, I mean just us ourselves as our individuals can have such identity crises without having those external characters come in and take us over. You know?
Yeah. And I think it's like bringing up the Elvis movie specifically, and that actor, it brings up like this the idea of like playing a person who actually existed in the material world is really interesting to me because
Mm.
then you are tapping into their energy, and their energy is on this
Sorry, I
material
just got
plane,
chills.
right? So like now they are moving through your body, and I feel like it's even harder to disconnect from those characters because they're like, oh shit, wait, I can incarnate again.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. And I'm just like noticing, I feel like I only recently woke up to the whole spiritual component of acting and of movies and TV shows. But you're so right. Like, it's like there's a difference when a character exists in like a fictional realm.
Hmm.
And then there's a difference when it's like you're you're doing a biopic and you're like embodying someone that existed and they have like living relatives still and their energy is like circulating the planetary grid as themselves, and then you're like feeding from that well to portray them. But then you're right, because it's like if their energies and their consciousness, however it works, it's like, wait, what if I don't want to lose this vessel?
Right. Right, exactly. Like, ah, shit, I just got possessed by Elvis.
Legit.
I don't even mean to do that.
That's exactly it though, right? Like the concept of possession. I mean, we're so disconnected from like spiritual knowledge at this point, but that's essentially what you're doing as an actor is you're like voluntarily letting another avatar, another character possess your vessel.
Yes.
And
That,
so
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. That's how I go about it. I mean, some people definitely like um take a more Stanislavski approach where they kind of like to add layers on and like let themselves bleed through. But I personally I like to get out of the way and like to fully let the character embody me.
yeah,
I just think it gives a more honest performance, and there's more, I don't know, I think it makes the world more real. So like even just helping the writer and the director out as much as I can, like in that world building process. You know, like I'm not from the 1920s, but this person is, so why not let them make the decisions for my body, right?
yeah. Whoa, that's so interesting, and it makes okay. So I have this thing too where I notice that whenever I bring so me as like a Areege, right? I'm just like moving around the world like as myself, and then I'll have like I'll have these situations that come up, like for example our health coaching thing, or even with Anya, like I'm doing VA work for her. So there's like this like one-on-one component that I have with individual people. I find that whenever I do that, whenever I make that kind of an agreement of like groups, I feel like I don't have that much. I mean, group energy fields are definitely powerful too, but there's something in my life about like one-on-one agreements with someone else where they're it's almost like the other person begins to bleed into my reality, and it's almost like even with you, like the fact that I've been thinking about acting and the world of acting and the world of like storytelling in that way, and I didn't even realize, like, because we've never spoken about it like personally one on one about it, but then it's bleeding into my life and it's like at the top of my consciousness. I find that so interesting because literally I swear to God, like 2 days ago I was just sitting there and thinking of like, whoa, like, acting seems kind of cool. It's never been something that I've ever thought of or been interested in, but just the exploration of what we were just talking about, of what it feels like to do that, to like embody a character and another energy outside of yourself. And like, I was like, that kind of sounds interesting. I feel like I want to try acting at some point in my life. And that was like a thought that has never occurred in my head at all. And now we're talking, and I'm like, oh, that's probably Celine's influence.
That's crazy. That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I found that like being in that one-on-one space with you, and now that I'm in liberated and just like seeing more of you than I got to in the past, I'm seeing like I feel like our souls are connected, you know?
Yeah.
Like I feel like in some way like we've signed a contract, or we have keys to each other, because like you reflect back to me exactly what I need to see, and it's like I'm opening doorways that like I didn't know were there because of the conversations that we have, or because of like the realizations that you share, and I'm like, that's exactly it. Like I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's the same the other way. It's like when I speak to you, you hold like keys for things that I'm working on, and it's just like I like speak to you and you'll like say like something really normal. You're just like saying a conversation, it'll just like spark something in me, and I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly the piece I needed. And it's like every time we meet, every week that happens, and I leave feeling like I've progressed so much in my progress of like my inner puzzles, is like my favorite metaphor at the moment, is just like there's always these like puzzles that I'm trying to solve within myself about like, I don't know, about life, about reality. And then I meet people and it's almost like they give me the keys, because it's like when I speak to you, it's like you've solved certain things in your life already. So when we come into like close contact, we just exchange that information, and for like our minds, it's our words, but then really I feel like it's just our it almost looks like our fields just kind of click into one another and just fill in the gaps.
Yes.
But it really, so on the same topic of like consciousness merging with like the acting thing and characters, and then but have you ever had that kind of experience that I'm trying to describe? It's like you begin to feel as if like if I spend a lot of one-on-one time with someone else, it's like their shit becomes my shit, and it's like we're just I it's almost like I take on some of their puzzles to solve, and they take on some of mine, and then we're just it feels like we're merging in some way. And
Yes.
then there's like an identity, there's this is like really prevalent in the coaching world too, because you'll notice like when people work with certain coaches, they kind of like they kind of like take them on. It's almost like there's so many people. I don't want to say this in a rude way, but there's some coaches that are like really popular and really like successful, but then they have all these clones.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand what you're saying. As
And
like,
it sorry, go ahead.
sorry. Um, yeah, like in my coaching program, I mean, I do appreciate the program and I appreciate the structure, but it's like the whole thing is just these two coaches that cultivated a really successful program. They're very successful coaches. But the all of like opening your relationship conversations, every single session is like really scripted. And it's like word for word right there for you. And I'm like I tried to practice that because they were like, just do the script, just try the script. It'll support you, it'll help you. But every single time I go through the script, I'm like, I feel like a clone. I feel like a robot. I don't feel like I'm embodying myself. And it feels almost like I just like going right back to that acting thing. It's like it feels like I have to leave myself by the pool and incarnate one of these coaches if I'm going to do these scripts. So I've kind of like I'll take the same structure they gave me, but I kind of throw the script out the window and just, co-create with the client at this point. Um
Yeah. And I've
I
noticed
can
that sorry.
no, go ahead.
I've noticed that in our just from the beginning of our work together, and then because at the beginning there was more of like a scripted thing, and then there was a point where you're like we just started flowing as ourselves, and I think that the scripts can be really helpful to give us a framework. I feel like
Mhm.
coaching programs and all of that, like mentoring with others, it gives us a framework of like how we might like the baseline structure.
Yes.
Okay, so this is like now relating to my painting because
Yeah,
finally
I
did it.
saw you started painting.
Yeah. See, I was like the other week I was like, yeah, I just don't feel like doing it, and then it just came like the inspiration just landed, and I was like, all right, I'm doing it now. But it's kind of like that because I have this like painting, and then I sketched out the lines of I was like using a reference photo as like the framework for the base structure of the piece. So I have like a sketched out like outline of the shapes and everything. But then I know that when I start actually painting, then I'm going to start filling it in my unique way that maybe is not going to be 100% accurate with the reference photo, and I find that that works the same way in I mean in acting too, right? You have the script, but then there's like a all these gaps that you can fill in with your own like your like only you can play the character, like everyone who can gets the same script is going to play the actor or the character differently, or everyone who like coaches from like for example if we all mentor from this one coach, unless if we are actually on the like self actualization path, then we're also simultaneously working on discovering ourselves and finding who we are. We're gonna do it differently. Like it's like I feel like they're meant to be, yeah, the framework. But then I think a lot of people also just get lost in the I have to do it the scripted way or else I'm not going to be successful. Um,
Yeah.
and then that's where like the magic is drained.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, I think that's really effective if you just want to give oh, this is a tool that'll help. Here you go, you know? But I don't think that's super effective in really creating a deep connection with another individual, which I think is one of my, like, one of the things that really got me into coaching was like I wanted to create those deep connections with people that were on a similar path as I was, and we could learn from each other and, you know, step out of our own way, right? And create a space where it was safe to do that, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of spaces where it is, without
Mm-hmm.
judgment and criticism and just like these constricting ideologies of like, oh, you're doing it wrong. Like there is no wrong way to do it. It's self-exploration, and it's about like the whole practice is about helping somebody get out of their own way and getting out of your own way in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find that with any creative endeavor, it's like we go into it and we're like for example with painting, it's like, okay, I'm painting because I want to like make a painting, or it's like I'm launching a coaching offering or like a masterclass series because I want to talk about this thing. But in reality, it's like everything that we do creatively express outwards, it's also just like we're launching okay, now we're gonna start getting into the video game metaphors. But it's like I find that every time I start a painting or start yeah, like launch an offering, whatever, it's almost like I'm launching like a mini game based on those themes that I've selected. So yesterday, like in our liberated group chat, I was talking about how like I really feel called to paint a pomegranate. And so
Mm-hmm.
now like the energy of pomegranates is just entering my reality, and I'm doing some sort of deep dive into those themes and archetypes that have been associated with pomegranates over the ages through different like cultures. Do you have a similar experience like when it comes to whatever creative project that you work on?
Yes, and it happens in like a really strange way, um and that I won't even realize what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I just kind of like, I'll hear the little download be like, do this. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And so I start doing something, and then all of a sudden, like things will start reflecting back to me and be like, oh, that's connected to this. Oh, that's connected to this. And I'm like, there's a lot of depth here when I thought, for example, I thought I was just painting a pomegranate, but all of a
Yeah.
sudden I've opened up this whole new energetic channel.
Yeah. Right? I mean, like yesterday I'm like sitting there doing like a deep dive research into Greek mythology just because I felt called to like pay, you know what I mean? Like I'm like learning about Hades and and this, I mean, the story of Hades and Persephone and all the archetypal like energies involved in that, and what the greater message behind that mythology was. And I'm just like, yeah, you're so right. It just takes you so much deeper than you were expecting, and I think a lot of us are really disconnected, or we don't expect it, you know. And then we don't expect it to happen. um but I think like that whole concept of that kind of stuff happening, like it's almost like you open up this like channel of energy whenever you go into some sort of creative endeavor. For me at least, it's really changed the way that I approach creativity, because in our mainstream society it's all like production, you know, it's like just productivity and how many pieces can you output, like how much can you share with the world, etc. But when you start realizing like actually maybe it's not best for me to just output as much as physically possible, because that's so much energy to hold, and that's so much like to process, right? Because like you just said it so perfectly, like you're opening up this channel of energy. And I was just like, wow, there, I feel like we're templating a new way, like with those of us that are aware of that in our creative lives. I feel like we're templating a new way, but maybe this is like the old way of being artists. But yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I always like that concept of it being like you take ancient Egypt and stuff, and I feel like we're moving more into like that energy, but it's a whole new version of that energy, you know? It's
Yes.
not just like the same thing over and over again. Like it has like the same blueprint, but we're a
Mm,
whole different generation imprinting our own um personality onto it, you know?
yeah. Yeah. There's a song that I listened, you know, Activation Vibration, Heather. On, she's a YouTuber, but she's also like just in the like social media spiritual community. But she does music, and she has a song called Ancient Future. And that's exactly what I feel like it is that you're describing, because that's exactly it. It's like we're reclaiming a lot of those lost arts, especially like the mystic arts, right? Like the fact that we're both in this group space called Liberated, which wants to be called a mystery school. Like mystery schools are don't exist right now in our main culture, but at a certain point in human history, they were a thing. Like they existed, and they like people sought them out and knew about them. And now it's like we're bringing that back, but then the vibe of Liberated is, it's like it has that ancient flair to it, but then yeah, we're doing completely new things in a new era where we're meeting online, which is like
Right.
interesting in its energetics on its own.
Right.
And yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I contemplate that a lot too, like the concept of like ancient future and bringing through the past, like what was serving, but doing it in a way that fits in with our modern day. And it's like the concept of like modern day mystic, like even is that?
No, I totally agree with that. I love that. Something that I've really been curious about for a while is, so you've like come at, you know, your business and your career at such a different angle, in that like you're so tapped into the flow and the energetics, and you just kind of like trust what comes through. What is that like for you? Like what does that look like when you're, you know, doing that?
I love this question. um the way that it's stabilized, or like the process has stabilized in, also I just saw a fish jump, that was cool. I'm sitting, for those of you that know, I'm like literally looking directly into a lake. It's just like heaven on earth vibes. But the way that the process was stabilized for me, I was actually, my creative journey, I was completely cut off from my creativity, I would say, until I started my YouTube channel. Because I was just very academic in school, and I, for whatever reason, thought that being an intellectual and being artistic just couldn't exist simultaneously. So I like opted in for my like intellectual Areege character and just shunned all of that like artistic side. But then I started doing YouTube, and I started noticing that there's like, I opened this like whole doorway to this whole other dimension of like human existence, which is self-expression for me, and how I, yeah, express. And for when I started, it was very much an external validation oriented thing, and I'm still dropping layers of that to this day. But like I started it off by being like, okay, well, I want to put this out, and the ideas would come to me based on what I thought people wanted to hear from me, or what other, it was like very outside in. I mean, yeah, it's like I would take ideas from, yeah, what I thought people expected of me, and like that whole flow. And then at a certain point, I feel like it was really when the pandemic started, and we had all of that space to ourselves, and it was like for the first time in my life I really had just extended periods of time in my own energy, and I started getting to know that more. Like, okay, well, if I want to create something, what, like, basically it's like I was just getting used to my own essence, and I was starting to feel my own essence in a way that I'd never done before. And so over the past 2 years I've just been strengthening that, like detaching from that pattern that I had of like creating based on like other people's expectations of me, and like now I'm like creating more from my inner essence. And the way that it flows now is, it's actually really interesting. It'll start off with just a desire to, I feel like the container of the creative piece will come through first. Like for example, it's like, oh, I just feel like painting, or like, oh, I feel like making a YouTube video, or oh, I feel like making a podcast. And like the structure and like the actual container, the vessel of it will come through first in just like a very innocent, like, oh, I kind of feel like doing that. And then I'll go into it. And sometimes the ideas will come through in terms of synchronicities in my reality. Like even with the pomegranate thing, the pomegranate painting, I was just noticing like pomegranate themed things over the past few days. Like the things that would stand out to me, like I was just moving about my day, I was just like I went to the grocery store, and I just zoned in on the pomegranate for whatever reason. It's almost like my attention was just like directed towards it and I didn't know at the time. Oh no. Am I frozen? Are you here?
Stuck, but oh wait, there you are. All right, it's
Okay.
back.
Yeah,
Sorry.
where did I leave off?
You just started talking about the synchronicities surrounding the pomegranate.
Yeah, so okay, so that so I it's almost like my awareness was just fixating on I was just noticing like pomegranate related things and then at a certain point when you have so many synchronicities about the same thing you start being like, "Oh, maybe there's something to do with the pomegranate right now." But that's just like a simple example with the painting. But with course offerings or like master classes or the course that I do, it is just like events will happen in my life that bring up certain themes that'll all kind of point in the same direction. And then when I actually sit down, so like I have at that point, it's like I have what's the word? No, like the mode, I guess, like the how like the vessel, the container of the creative project, and then I've got this like raw theme or like raw energy that wants to come through, but then it's in the actual process of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I just thought of it like the vessel, it's like the painting or the video, that's like the 3D component that comes through first, and then like the higher dimensional component is just like the energies of the pomegranate, for example. And then I have to actually sit down and create the space to bring it forward. And it's like in the actual creation process is when I'll start diving deeper and starting to understand like what parts of the energy wants to be transmitted here and like why am I doing this. And yeah, so it kind of feels like a three-step process. There's like the 3D component where the vessel and the container and the idea of how I'm going to do it comes through first, and then it's like the raw energy, and then the third stage 3 is about bridging it bridging it so that there's a point, like the point comes through when I'm actually filming the video. And I often don't, like, I just flow with it. I don't have I've tried structures in the past, but I have to just open up the space and then sit down and see what wants to come through in that moment. Like even when I write posts, I'll have like the raw energy and the idea, but I don't know what's going to be said until I actually am like writing or typing it out. But yeah. Does that
Wow.
answer what
Yes.
you were saying?
Oh, that's so beautiful. Um, yeah, something I definitely really appreciate about you and just how you work is your connection to like your femininity and like the way, I don't know, you flow in such a divine feminine energy. And I think that's really, really important right now as we're like rebuilding the world that has been so patriarchal and so like toxic masculinity. There's only one way to do it. And you're like, what if I completely challenged that and did it completely differently and was still successful? Watch me do it. And like, I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with that. I love that.
Thank you for saying that because that brings up yeah, like right, because I feel like the masculine paradigm of creating is was how I was doing it before, right? Like, okay, let's look out and see what is gonna fit in with what already exists, right? So like there's a structure that exists. There's like what people are already looking for from us, and we're like trying to fit ourselves into the existing structure. But then like the other paradigm that's coming through and like the way that I operate is it's like you just kind of you're like fuck the old structure first of all. If the old structure needs to come through in this transmission, it will, but that's not my priority at all. Like there's such a like this knowing that there's something new that needs to like the old fuck the old paradigm, like there's a new paradigm that needs to come through, and it needs that's like what I'm working with. And then it's about listening and waiting, and it's like you're not looking at what already exists. There's some again like the 3D and the like the 3D physical reality. It's like the masculine creativity process is like seeing what already exists in the 3D and then just continuing to build that out. And then this like feminine way, or how you described it, it's like, okay, I know it exists in the 3D. There's like I see the gaps here, but then to create something new, it's like you're literally channeling it in from places that are not already actualized.
Hmm.
And to do that, because you can't see it in front of you and you don't know, it's not like as tangible, you have to just kind of wait for those synchronicities, or wait, like pay attention and like listen to where like life itself is guiding you. But there's a piece coming through around that related to structure. Okay, so kind of like, when we're doing psychedelics and stuff, and there's like this whole, a lot of people know about like sacred geometry.
I was just
um
thinking about that, but yeah, go
yeah.
on.
Okay. Okay, good, we're telepathic. But all of this is so cool because it was coming through, this theme comes through every now and then. And that there was like even in the fearless decision making masterclass I did, it came through and I wasn't expecting it. But I have this like connection to the understanding that there's a there's like an overarching structure, like an overarching like organic structure to this reality. And because this is like a free will planet, every being on the planet has the choice to either align with the organic, like basically perfect, like completely synchronized, the universe as one being. Basically, it's like to be a being, like everything has to be synchronized and working like in perfect harmony, for things to move as smoothly as possible. But then on Earth, because it's a free will planet, every being has the ability to decide whether they want to flow with the structure, like with the organic flow, or do their own thing and like go against it. But then when you go against it, you create disharmony. So when we talk about like creating the new paradigm, it very much feels like we're so far into the like disharmonious structure at this point, in terms of how like the world has been created and the systems and everything. So now, like with all of us that are invested in the new paradigm, or bringing through the new paradigm, or like my favorite concept, like the golden age, it has to be from that place where you're like tapping straight into the or like you have to like have that direct communication or direct connection with the concept that there is this like greater pattern that exists, and like pulling from there.
Mhm.
But yeah, it like ties into sacred geometry. It's like, if everything was patterned in a perfect way, how do I act, like how is it that I need to act to be in alignment with that? Because just like going off the logic, it's like if you align yourself with that, then you're in like the path of least resistance, because you're being held and carried basically by literally the entire reality itself.
Yeah.
um yeah, do you have any insights into it? I'm just like, I feel like our flow here is very much like I like drop stuff, and then it's like, okay, here's the ball for you, like what downloads did you get from me just saying that? And then just, I love it. It's so, I feel like I don't flow with anyone in this way. It's really interesting.
Yes, I appreciate it as well. Um, so like from what you were saying, it just like the thing that kept coming up for me was like, so you let go. You let go. It's already
Mm.
perfect, you know? It's the disharmony is created when we try to control it. You know, when we're in this mindset that it's not already happening perfectly, and we try to
Mm.
like fix it and like we're actually breaking it by doing so. Like the minute we stop trying to control, and I found this in like my own healing, is like it's already all there for you perfectly and everything is already taken care of. So there is no need to just get out of your own way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, it's like, I think that it's basically that theme that comes up. I feel like humanity's been wrestling with it for so many centuries now, but that like rejection of like your naturalness, like what makes like nature itself, right? There's like this rejection of our natural desires and our natural ways of being. And there's almost like in the culture, it's like the most natural ways of being are the wrong ones. We have to fix it. And then that's like what creates a disharmony, because there's like, I guess it just comes down to like an innate distrust in that flow, in like the organic flow.
Yes. Yeah. And that goes, that reminds me of like when we were talking and I call it my spiritual psychosis because
I really wanted to get into this, so I'm excited that it's just coming up because I was curious about it.
um, so I think the biggest thing for me was I had come to the realization that I am God interacting with itself. All right. And I had I had experienced like a lot of trauma. So I was having a really hard time trusting myself and trusting everything else around me. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm God, then I can control everything. And if I can control everything, then nothing bad will happen. Um, so I zoomed out so far so I can try and like move all of the puzzle pieces. But in doing so, I kept hurting myself because like we were just saying, everything is perfect, everything is already flowing as it needs to be. And now I'm just like I'm accidentally stabbing needles into myself because I'm trying to stick myself where I think I'm supposed to be. Um and it took like a lot of recovery time and a lot of just like decompressing, logging off of all social media, just completely isolating myself and just sitting with everything that I had gone through and why I went through everything I went through, to kind of recognize like as a god I can co-create and build things in the world, but I don't have to control the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think about this a lot too because have you ever listened? I feel like you might have because I know you're tuned into that world, like the Synchronicity podcast, um, by Noah Lampert.
Oh, I
He's
have
like
listened to a
connected to
little bit of
Jessa
Noah.
Reed and
Yeah.
P the Fairy and that crew. um, I feel like I listened to his podcast and it was like that was in 2020 and that's like when that realization started landing on me too. Like, oh, true. Like what we were speaking about actually in our last call about like how for so long in spiritual circles and religion and stuff, like God was this all-knowing being outside of yourself, and now we're moving into this space where each of us as individuals are realizing that actually we are God incarnate as like different containers. um but something it's like I wrestle with that a lot too because I had the same type of thing where it's like you kind of come into that realization like that you create your own reality thing, and then you find the law of attraction manifestation stuff, and then you just want to control like as much as possible. But then very quickly you realize that you like you just said like you realize that we have such a limited vision as to what the fuck's going on in this reality. Like there's so many, we're so zoomed in like as this one human with our like limited five senses. We know like less than a fraction of what's happening on like a zoomed out scale. So for us to try to like control everything from this little like Areege, it just is so inefficient. And so something that like makes me, or the way I like to think about it is that there's me and then there's just I just see it's like see it as like different layers of myself that just extend in awareness levels. And there's a certain version of myself that just exists. So it's like so if reality is like the game, there's a version of myself that I mean there's different layers of myself that exist within the game, like for example me as a Reed, but then also like this awareness that I'm also this entire, like I'm also this chair, like I'm also projecting all of this out. But then there's a version of me that exists outside of the game completely. And they're the ones that can see the whole game and know like what the beginning point and the end point is. Actually, this is so interesting because this is exactly what my post that I wrote on Instagram today was about. But it's like putting my trust in that version of myself and being like, okay, if I don't it almost it's like touching on this like new layer, there's a new like concept of self-love and self-trust. It's like okay, you can trust, it's like level 1 is like trusting yourself as a human, but
Yes.
then can you like extend that self-trust into the other bodies of you that exist like beyond this, even this game, right? But it's hard because we have trauma and then we're like, okay, but that really shitty thing happened to me, so how can I trust that version of me? But then and then you realize like okay, but that version of you outside of the game has such a different perspective on trauma, and this is, again, we were talking about this a few weeks ago about how, like, an experience is an experience, and that's such a different paradigm of thinking, because when you're in it, it sucks, but then that spiritual being that's, like, putting itself in this human thing, it's like, oh, trauma, like, ooh, pain, how interesting. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
it's, like, sadistic as fuck.
So fucked up, right?
Yeah.
um it's so interesting that you just described it like that, because a big synchronicity that I got that was like, that really freaked me out at first, but now I'm like easing into comfort with it as I've like, as it keeps reflecting back at me, is um while I was in that state of not trusting anything, like in TV shows or like in conversations with people or just like in random posts all over the place, it would be like, it would talk about like this higher, so I listened to Jeffrey Reed a lot. So
Yeah.
my understanding of it was the Intergalactic Federation. And so what was being reflected back at me was like, the masters, quote unquote, know what's going on, and you keep trying to control what the masters are trying to do in this reality, and you're fucking things up. And I was like, oh, so I see you're trying to control me and trying to trick me into trusting you so that way you can. And I was like, just looping myself really, while it just kept reflecting back to me, no, you're being stupid, just like trust, just trust, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and okay, so it's interesting now, like, bringing in, like, the galactic stuff, because I'm, like, really tuned into all of that, too. And I had to kind of, over the past few months, like, as I was working on, like, grounding into my body, I just had to, like, kind of disconnect from it a little bit, because, so we have, like, the Earth game, but then now we're waking up to, like, the games beyond the Earth game. And it's like, okay, if I haven't mastered the Earth game, it's not helpful for me to, like, start processing my life in the Pleiades.
Oh, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, there's so many layers that get added on when you consider the fact that you exist beyond just the Earth game. And then also, then there's like, so there's like our solar system, the galactic game, but then there's like a version of you outside of all of that. Like, it just goes on infinitely. And yeah, but I never think of it like, I've never actually thought of it as like a group of, like a council or something that's like controlling Earth. Because I'm like, okay, maybe there are beings that are kind of moving the chess pieces in this plane, but there's also that they're also me.
Right. Exactly. I also had like this weird experience where I thought God was really lonely.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. That shit hits on a soul level. You're just like, sorry, just continue and then I'll share my.
So I'm just so glad you understand, because I thought I was the only one who like thought like that. No, please share what you were gonna say.
Yeah, when you get to that realization where you're like, oh fuck, is it just me? All alone? And this fucking just making these games up and all these characters and it's just me fucking all alone. And Selene's me and Garrett's me and like all of it's just fucking me and I'm just like this lonely entity that's just created. Like, how fucking sad.
Yes, exactly.
It's funny because it hits so deep. Like, I'm like tearing up right now because that is such a core feeling that I actually feel a lot. And it just, you hit that certain level of like spiritual evolution or spiritual realization, and you have to start processing that. And it's like processing the grief that you have as God.
Yes, exactly. And it's,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always trying to like comfort myself, because that comes up like a lot. And I'm always trying to comfort God and being like, well, yeah, maybe you are playing all of the characters and all of it's just you, but also all of the characters, like the characters don't know what's going on with the other characters, right? Like, like there's millions of people in like on the other side of the world that I have no idea what's going on with them right now, but they're having just as real and just a valid experience as I am, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But like, you know, when you zoom out that far, it's like you have to also meet it by zooming back into that very human experience and being like, look at how small our perspectives are. There's a
Yeah.
million of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's so interesting to get into that because it is so uncomfortable
Yeah.
on a felt like somatic level. It's like oh because it's like oneness. That's just like the product of like you enter into the conversation about oneness from a really like light place, like oh yeah, we're all one, yay, that's so beautiful, and then you go deeper and you're like oh, I kind of I don't know, that's kind of sad. But then we're also projecting our human emotions of sadness onto like the version of us that, I mean, maybe doesn't perceive it that way, but as humans, we feel sad that that is the case, which is
Right.
really interesting.
And I
But
feel like if this, you know, all consuming entity is, you know, controlling all of us to an extent, then if it has allowed us to come to that realization, then perhaps it wanted to experience that inherent emptiness of realizing that, you know, essentially we are just a void.
yeah, yeah, wow, yep, and that's why like it will. It's almost like there's also it's a loneliness and a boredom. It's like fuck, what the fuck am I supposed to do here? But then that's also why like from that perspective, the experiences of trauma that we have in human life can be seen as interesting to
Mm-hmm.
that version of us. That's like, oh, it's just me hurting my. It's like if I like hit myself, you feel almost safer in that because you're like, well, I'm just doing it to myself. I can control it and stop it at any time. But then you like project the consciousness into a space where it can't perceive that it can control the other person who's harming them. So yeah, I mean, it just keeps going back to the point where I just like wake up in the morning and I'm like, still here in this weird ass fucking reality. Like, what the fuck?
Yep.
Literally, I wake up almost every day and I think I have that thought, like, whoa. I'm gonna just kind of like disassociate for like a millisecond and then come back. And it's so weird. Because there's also, like, as a human, there's like also that feeling of like being stuck here and like
Yes.
trapped, and which is where a lot of the narratives around like being like break out of the matrix, like all of that comes out of. But yeah, do you have that experience as well of like that, like just a feel? I mean, I guess that's like feeling the like inherent limitation of this version of our existence.
Yes, I do. It's like, and I am in that. Like some mornings I'll wake up and I feel like I'm going into my phone a lot to distract myself from that.
Yeah.
But if I don't, it's like it is that feeling. It is just it's almost an emptiness, you know? And I'm like, I can do like the realization that you can do anything in the universe, and I'm like, well, fuck, I can do anything. That's boring.
Yeah. Yeah. But then for me, it's also like, okay, well, I have such a deep knowing that that's true. And then I'm like, okay, but then what if I wanted to do it right now, but I'm stuck here as a Areege? Like, so annoying.
Mm.
Like, and this is actually like relating back to being like merged with like the Outlander realm. Because I'll have these thoughts like, okay, well, I feel like there's a version of me that, like, they exist somewhere. They can exist somewhere. And it's like, what if I wanted to travel into a character and like actually live there, like if I could like completely move my consciousness, and it's like there's a version of me that can do that, but I can't do it right now, and that bothers me. And then also, this is really interesting, that's coming up on the same theme. When I was a kid, my this is like I remembered this a few weeks ago and it just like blew my mind, because that feeling of like wanting to just choose what realm you want to be in at any given moment, it's been such a present feeling for me. And when I was a kid, like my mom tells me that I used to watch like cartoons, like Arthur, for example, and I used to like cry my eyes out because I told my mom that I wanted to go in there, and my
Mm.
mom would be like, "That's impossible." And me as a kid, I would like try to convince her that it's 100% possible, and I was so frustrated and angry that she told me that it wasn't because and I'm like, what was that? Like, because when we're kids, we have such a like the veil hasn't completely come over us yet. So I'm like, that's so interesting that as a kid I was expressing that like I wanted to like hop into the Arthur realm and like be a character in there and live in their world. And I was so upset that I couldn't, and my mom told me I couldn't. And I just think about that. I'm like, that's so whoa.
So like that kind of reminds me of a shower thought that I had last night where so like basically what trauma does is it kind of like disconnects, right? Like it breaks those connections. And when we're born, we're kind of pure. We're one whole mind, and the disconnects are
Mm,
kind of like the gold within the disconnects is what makes us that. That's our ego, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um so if you had had that thought, but like if there was the version of you that had that thought but kept it to yourself, so your mom never created a disconnect of you can't go in there, is it possible that that version of you is
Mm,
the version of you that jumps in, and as soon as that disconnect happened you were like, mom, you just made it so this version of me couldn't do that?
yeah. Whoa. Yeah. But I try to explain this to I love that I have people like you in my life that I could just have this as a serious conversation cuz I'll like bring I've brought this up to Garrett and it's like he'll be like, "Oh yeah." His response was like, "Why has your perception of reality been so fluid?" Like his is very like it's more stable or not stable is the wrong word, but yeah, like my perception of what's possible is so fluid because it's like I feel like I just have such deep memories of doing that kind of stuff and then coming here and being like, fuck, I can't do that anymore. That fucking sucks. Right? And there's a longing, like, that's what I've been processing over the past few weeks, like, with like, getting into Outlander. There's a longing for that ability. Um, that it feels sad. It's like sad that I can't, like, there's a grief that I like a very real grief that I feel that I don't have access to that ability of just being able to hop into like whatever character that I want at any given time. I'm like stuck as this Areege character, as like this Areege ego. So that like really intrigues me all the time because I guess that's why also now acting is interesting to me because it gives me a little bit of that freedom.
That makes a lot of sense.
Whoa. But I've never, but it's so weird because I've never considered myself as an actor, which is such a human thing. To be like, oh, well, I've never felt the need to act before. It's so weird. That's not me. um, but yeah, your turn.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. I think what I'm seeing like right now is that whole concept of jumping into different avatars. Maybe this this time, maybe it'll be the experience of letting other avatars jump into you,
Mm-hmm.
and like
Yeah.
play that reversal. Like, I don't know, or like if in a past life that is something that you could do so fluently, and I don't know if we're going into universal law or anything here, but like you perhaps abused it or were bored with it, and you were like, you know what, I'm going to set this limitation for this
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. And now you're like frustrated that you don't have that kind of
Mm-hmm.
superpower that you used to be able to tap into.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, this connects to I haven't posted this podcast. Actually, now I might post this masterclass, but I like did this masterclass a few months ago called "Awakening Your Multidimensional Superpowers,"
Mm.
and that's what came through in that masterclass was like we have when people even in the spiritual community just talk about like telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, all of this stuff, and it's like there's a grief that human beings can't do that anymore But then what you said about like the abuse of power, there's in the masterclass that I did called Awakening Multidimensional Superpowers, the information that wanted to come through was that to get those powers again, we have to get to a level of responsibility again, so we don't, like you said, abuse that power and create the like disharmony in the greater system. And like to be able to attain that level of responsibility, you have to synchronize yourself with that, again, like the organic structure, so that when you do get, it's like when you synchronize yourself to a point where it's like really hard for you to like come into the disharmony piece, and then from that synchronization and alignment to like the greater structures of this reality, then you can like get those abilities back and start utilizing them, because you have access to the greater awareness and the greater plan or the greater structure, and it's, you know how to use those powers in a way that is not going to cause chaos. So, yeah. Wow. Yeah. But, you know, that's like a far off vision for Liberated, is having, there's like this far off vision that I have about this space, about like having like actual, at a certain point in the next few decades, I feel like we'll be able to start accessing those powers again, and like having Liberated Mystery School like in-person locations to work on them.
Yeah.
And it feels kind of far away, because I feel like there's like certain, there's this like energetic milestones that we have to get past to be able to enable ourselves to be in that space. But it's almost like if you've watched Doctor Strange, and have you watched Doctor Strange?
I'm not outside of like the overall Marvel movies.
Oh, okay. But he gets trained at this like secret, basically it's a mystery school. I forget what it's called. But it's that vibe of like, it's like you're basically going there to strengthen your abilities in these ways, and it feels very like Marvel Universe superpower thing, but it feels like such a real mission of mine, and like such a real thing that like Liberated wants to become at a certain point. But yeah, I haven't shared that with anyone really, because it's like so out there for so many people, but I feel like you get it.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I am obsessed with that. And honestly, it might not even be as far out there as it feels like, because, you know, it's like divine timing isn't what we think it is. Like when I first heard of like divine timing, I always thought like, oh, like when it's the right time in like 10 years, like it has nothing to do with actual time as we perceive it. It has everything to do with the energetics of it. Like you just said, like the energetic blockages, we can get through those. That could happen within a year's time, a 10 years time, 100 years time. Like it just depends on how we're vibrating and the lessons we're integrating and moving through, you know?
Yeah. Again, like how fast can we solve, it's like it's about how fast we can solve the puzzles. Not about like we have only like this 5 years to like solve this puzzle. Yeah, that's so true. And it is like, it's like the energetic clicks have to have, I mean, even in Liberated right now, we're already in an informal way starting to experience that like group field energy and the synchronicities and things that happen from being like that. It's almost like we're exploring telepathy in a way, and so it's like we're starting to already tap into that like core mission of the space. But I'm excited for when we can do like this superhero stuff. But then there's a part of me that's like, maybe it's not, I don't know, I'm really committed to making it like what we saw in like Marvel movies and things like that, and making that real, because I'm like, that'd be so cool. And that might also be why I feel such a strong like frustration, because maybe I'm supposed to feel that frustration as like a drive to figure it out again.
Yes. Oh my god, yes, that's so perfect.
I just had another thought. Have you read the Sophia Code? Am I cut out? Oh, hello.
Hello.
Oh, okay. Did I cut out?
No.
Oh. Okay.
What?
I was like, have you read the Sophia Code? And then it was just silent.
Oh, no. I have not read the Sophia Code. I'm sorry. I shook my head. I might
Oh, yeah.
I
So I
forgot.
can't see you when I'm talking because of the way that it's recorded. That's so funny.
My bad.
Um, that's so funny. But there's okay. So first of all, I recommend the Sophia Code whenever you feel called to do like go into it. But there's one chapter about um. So okay, so there's an ancient Egyptian goddess called Hathor,
Hmm.
and there's so the Sophia Code is basically like it's a channeled text, and it's essentially like a divine feminine. Each chapter is like a different divine feminine mentor, and so the author Kaya Ra, who's like the human that like wrote the book, um, she like channeled these like energies and beings to create this like transmission basically. And
What?
so one of the chapters is Hathor, which is like an ancient Egyptian goddess, and she transmits teachings about what we were just talking about, like for example, like hopping into different characters, like your consciousness. So she was known, and I think this is like trackable, like actually doing like research in ancient Egyptians spirituality and things. But what she was known for was her ability to tap into like other versions of herself and like move around, like so, like she was Hathor as on Earth, but then she was like really connected to her avatar on the Sirius star system. So she would, in her like incarnation on Earth, would like hop back and forth, and live those two lives simultaneously. So that's what's coming up. I'm like, oh, that might be connected to why I'm like wanting to hop into other characters, because maybe it is like you're already all the characters, right?
Hmm.
But you just have to figure out the path to get your consciousness from
Oh,
one
okay.
point to the other, and what does that practice look like. And in the Sophia Code, like they don't tell you how to do it, but like the fact that it tells you like it's possible, like there's been like supposedly humans that have even like done it in different eras, like in Egypt and things like that. But yeah, I just find that also fascinating, and it rings true for me.
Yeah. I'm visualizing almost like a pyramid scheme, I guess, of like, so all of it's happening at the same time. And it's almost like, and this could be like the longing and the grief, that feeling of like wanting to go home or what have you, is it's
Mm-hmm.
like all of our consciousness is all like separated all over the place, right? So you just talked about how Hathor was connected to the Sirius star system, and she had like that link that linked back together for her. So she was able to, her both of her consciousnesses became one again, and it's like moving back into that oneness and like being the hand with all of the fingers, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and just remaking those connections is just like more fully embodying all of who I am, not just who I am on this material plane, while I'm simultaneously embodying whoever I am on some other plane, you know, and feeling like that big disconnect.
Whoa. I mean, and that's like the path of spiritual evolution as we know it too, right? Like zooming, being able to zoom more and more out. But can you imagine what it would feel like if you had access to two avatars at the same time? Like, what would that even.
Like,
What the fuck?
that's so trippy. That's
Yeah, like,
crazy.
how would your awareness. Okay, so have you ever watched or heard of. I forget how to. Oh, I don't know how to.
Matilda?
No. I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. Matthias de Stefano.
Oh, I have not.
Okay, he did this one series on Gaia, which is like that streaming platform called Initiation. But I'll send this to you afterwards. There's an Aubrey Marcus podcast, which is this podcaster on
I
YouTube.
love him.
Yeah, yeah. So Matthias went on that podcast and spoke about his like he Matthias kind of like got initiated onto this path of being like a teacher because he like from being a young kid had memories of like he explains it like his past lives because from time perspective it's a past life, but then obviously we know it's parallel happening. But he, as a kid, had access to his life in Kemet, which is ancient Egypt. And so he, as a kid, like that link was still there, but he didn't know how to control it properly. So he had a really difficult time operating and functioning in this world, like as Mateus, because he was simultaneously like connected to that other lifetime. And I'm like, that sounds horrible to be a kid and no one understands what you're going through.
Right. That's like immediately, I feel like you get hit with a diagnosis and they're like, well, you're
Mm-hmm.
crazy. So you should just stay in your room and not bother anybody.
Yeah,
Like,
right?
and
And
work through that.
exactly. And like then this concept of like schizophrenia, and that it's like that your realities just bleed into one another. But he said in the podcast, he was talking about how when he used to forget people's names in like his Mateus life because there were so many names to remember from like his two simultaneous lifetimes that it was just like too much information to process. And I think now he's like kind of stabilized it more. But I'm like, how do you even, it just, information overload.
Yeah, absolutely. So like when you're having that experience, is that like similar to, like, could you be tapping into that experience when you were tapping into that grief you were telling me about?
Mm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you'd like to share, go ahead. I don't want to like.
Yeah, I don't feel called to share like a lot of the details about it, but yeah, like there's like when you have, so the, I guess like the base thing I was experiencing was like I felt like a longing for this. It wasn't really a person, but it was like an individual entity, so it could have been a person. But it's like I was longing for this like connection that I had with someone at some point that I didn't have access to anymore. Like this, it almost like in human terms would be like this person I was like really close with this one person and now they're not here. But then this experience that I was having was like I knew that I this person didn't exist in this reality, in my Areege reality. It was like some other reality that I was existing in, and I was processing the grief of losing that person in that other reality. And it, yeah, that's actually, yeah, I
Like,
think that's similar because it's like your current, like my mind as Areege could only feel the raw emotions, and like I knew what it was because I can like compare. It's like, oh, this feels like longing, this feels like grief, this has the like I could feel the energies and kind of try to categorize them, but the details and the storylines, there was no information or no like no actual Areege memories associated with that person, or that I would just kind of see like have glimpses of feelings. um yeah, that, yeah, thanks for bringing that back. Yeah, I guess that's what it would be like to start tapping into that parallel self and start, it starts bleeding into your current reality. And then again, going back to our conversation at the beginning, you have to like learn how to control that and like how to create those boundaries, like between, like for example, you and the like the character when you're acting it out. And wow, I love that there's an overarching theme to this whole conversation.
I feel
It's
like
so
we
cool.
always, like, I feel like we're just, whenever we talk, we're just put into its container and there's a million different talking points and you're like, let's do this one
Yes.
and then this one and then let's grab this one and then all of them just kind of like interconnect. It's really cool.
Yeah, and that's like my creative process in general. That's what it's like. You know what you want to do. Like I wanted to record a podcast. Okay, Selene is the subject, and then we show up, and then we just have to pull from whatever is live right now. Because again, like if I try to pull, like if I try to like create a structure and like wrote questions for you to ask, like if I prepared those questions like yesterday, the energy by the time we get here shifts so much that there's different talking points that need to be taught. It's like if I tried to like put together a set of questions, it would only really feel alive if we had the conversation as I was pulling those questions. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's like I just have this
Yes.
like understanding that the themes and the energies shift like literally in every moment, and you have to just for me at least in the way that I work, I just have to like pull from the moment, or it doesn't come out right, or it doesn't feel right, essentially.
No, I agree with that. Um, I like if I do anything like in preparation wise, like I'll do bullet points
Mm-hmm.
and like it'll be like one word that'll be like, oh, that
Mm-hmm.
triggers this. And then I have something to move into just so there's not like that dead space that's so, uncomfortable for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And I think again this comes back to the trust point, where after you do it a certain amount of times, because I used to have that too, like bullet points, and even my first few, like when I interviewed Divya and when I interviewed Anya, I had like bullet points on what I wanted to talk about. But then when you like actually, when I went through the experience, it's like I would barely use them. And so when I came into this one, because you're my third guest, Garrett doesn't count. You're my, because I talk to him all the time anyway. But you're my third guest, and this time I was just like, yeah, I don't actually need any bullet points, because that trust like started building up from my, like I was starting to build up evidence that I can just flow, and it comes out cool. But yeah, yeah. But I don't want to keep you on forever, even though I love
I
talking
love
to
talking
you.
to you. No, you're
Yeah.
fine.
But
Um,
yeah, how are you feeling right now? Like, do you want to continue and talk more? Like, is there any other things that are like really alive for you that we want to talk about, or should we close out? Because I also do feel complete, but I'm also like, but there could be more.
I definitely feel complete, but there is like one question that kind of just popped through for me that if you have the availability.
I do, but I just have to pee first.
Okay, go pee.
Okay, I'm gonna pause the recording.
No problem. I want to take some water anyway.
Okay. All right, we're back. So, what was the question?
All right. So my question has to do with interpersonal relationships. Um, so I know that you and Garrett have been building a relationship together for a while now, especially while you're going through this process of like deconstructing and reconstructing yourself. What is it kind of like balancing that relationship with him while also maintaining a relationship with yourself, and how have you noticed like the two influence each other?
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so it's been really interesting because as you just said, it's like we're also like simultaneous, or at least I really am really into like deconstructing my identities and like recreating myself as like my real self all the time. And there's been periods of time where like when I feel like in 2020 is when I really start. Okay, so before 2020, like Garrett and I got together in 2015, I had a pretty stable identity basically, or like sense of self. Like there was things going on in my life, but it was like I wasn't thinking too much about identity, or like my priorities and my goals were pretty stable. So and then I mean, also at the time we were also simultaneously okay, I mean, how am I saying my identity was stable when when I first got together with Garrett? That was like also like the first few years of our relationship was us processing together, me like detaching myself from my family and letting go of that identity of myself. That was like the good South Asian daughter, all of that stuff. And then, hold on. Just tell me if I freeze because I can't see your expressions.
I will.
Um, and okay, but anyway, but still, like throughout university, I had a pretty stable like priority set, and I was like, this is where the direction and I want to go in my life. But then, as you know, like 2020 happened, and all of that just started dissolving, like that 5 year plan, 10 year plan, etc. And there was a period in the first like yeah, like 2020, 2021, even like the first half of 2021, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know if this relationship, like there was such a fear that I had that what if I like change so much, or my priorities shift so much that Garrett and I no longer like click with each other or like fit with one another anymore, because like I'm going down this like intense like path of the mystic. And Garrett's like he understands spiritual concepts, but he's not into it like I am. So I didn't know if that could harmonize for like a while. I was like convinced that our relationship was going to end, even though nothing was actually happening to reflect that, but it was just an inner fear. But then at a certain point, it was like, actually, it was exactly when I started just being more open with him about what I was experiencing. It always comes down to like the communication. It's like the more closed off I was, or like the more fearful I was that he was gonna judge me or like whatever, and I wouldn't share with him and I wouldn't like let him into my world, the more distanced I felt and the more fear I felt that we would like break up. But then at a certain point, like I guess mid 2021, I just started being like, what would happen if I started share, even if he can't meet me, like for example when I'm talking to you about the multidimensionality stuff, I can have those conversations with him and he can't meet me like where you meet me, and like be able to riff off of that and have like a relatability with it. But I noticed that he was still open to it, like he was still open to discussing it, and there was like a trust, even if he didn't understand it or couldn't really relate to it, he had this like openness and trust in me, and that's where we kind of met. And so ever since we like unlocked that door, it's like, oh okay, I realized like I just have to be more open and more like communicative as I can be about what I'm experiencing and what I'm processing. Then we can find like some sort of middle ground, and continue moving forward together, and then he does the same thing. But I don't know if that like really answers your question, but that's what I wanted to share, because we are on very like different vibes sometimes, but somehow we stay together. There's also this piece with Garrett that feels like I feel like I have such a like past life. I feel like I've been with him for like we've been partners in like lifetimes for multiple lifetimes, and I've had I don't know, it's just such a strong like when even when we met in this life in 2015, it there was such a like tangible feeling of like just picking back up on where we left off.
Yeah.
And I think that energy, or like whatever that bond is what allows us to just like keep together. It's really mystical. And it's not
That's
something that I can, it's not like we had, our relationship never felt hard, like it never felt like we had to work on it.
okay. That's really interesting. No, I like that a lot. And it's interesting that like when you guys like that piece about when you guys first met, that's when you kind of started to deconstruct. I feel like that ties directly into the notion that you guys have been doing this for a while.
Mm,
Um, you know, like you found him and it was like, oh, okay, I'm found like my partner in this, and now it's like it's time to start moving into this new paradigm and
mm,
start, you know,
mm-hmm.
breathing life into this aspect of self. And I think that's, I don't know, I just think that's really, really interesting. And I don't know, I've just been curious about that for a while. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just always, it's hard to explain because I feel like it kind of makes like there's been people that like ask me to talk about like conscious relationships or just being in really, because you know like in the coaching world it's like the two biggest like most successful industries or like sub industries are like how to make more money and how to have a really, or how to like get into a really, or like find your partner,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like
Yes.
love and money. So I've had like people like ask me about that, and it's like I don't have anything to say because I just feel like what you said earlier in this conversation, it's almost like with any relationship that I have, it feels pre-contracted, like it's like we decided to be together before we entered this game, whether it's like me and Garrett in like a long-term life partnership or like a coaching one-on-one coaching client. It feels like we set up the agreement beforehand. And so when it comes to like trying to coach people to like find the person, or even like money coaching and client, like how to gain more clients, it's like it just feels useless to me. It's like I feel like no one actually can It's almost like you have to reach those checkpoints. I don't know. It kind of, but then there's like a lens where that can feel disempowering because you're like, what, do I just have to wait? But again, it's just coming into the trust part that we just spoke about.
Right. And
But
I think,
go ahead.
sorry, I was gonna say, I think a big part about the energetics of a relationship is like, if you're looking for one, then what something I've had to ask myself is, what is it that you're looking for in someone else that you don't already think that you have within yourself? Like, and there's like a big codependency piece that once you figure out that energetic, all of your relationships are just going to be disharmonious because you're trying to pull what's not in you from another individual, and you feel like you're incomplete without them when that's just not the case. And yeah.
Yeah. And then pile on the like cultural expectation of like everyone's just expected to be in a partnership. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's so, and it's like, no, that's not actually true. Like, I mean, if you want it, then yeah. If I feel like I also have this belief, like if there's a desire within you, that means, and it's like a pure desire, because sometimes our desires are warped based on like programming. But if
Right.
you like do the inner work and it's like the desire's still there, then I feel like that's just the seed that's like pulling you towards that specific. It's like you're being magnetized. Like I feel like the desire is like an indication that you're being magnetized towards something.
Mm.
Um, but I also think that there's a lot of people that might think they want a relationship, but then not actually, like deep down, maybe they won't. I don't know, cause the other thing about relationships is that it definitely, they're basically a constant mirror
Mm.
and a constant like,
Yeah.
they constantly show you where you're not like Garrett will constantly show me where I need to do more work.
Yes.
And it can be so triggering. And if like someone doesn't have the space to do that, I can see why a relationship would be like energetically repellent. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I've found that in all of my relationships. And I'm like, all of my, I've had so many relationships, and all of them have like looked pretty, most of them have looked pretty toxic, but that's because both myself and the partner I was experiencing it with um, had work to do on ourselves, and we weren't at that level of actualization of like realizing, oh, this is a mirror and this is reflecting back to me the work I have to do on myself. I shouldn't be shameful that I am bad. It's just, this is a piece of me that needs healed. So I've had all of those experiences, and now that I'm like deconstructing that shame, it's like I'm able to pinpoint all of the stuff within me that's like, okay, this is what happened in this relationship that reflected this back to me, and so on and so forth. And now I'm like in this space of being able to be alone. I can really deconstruct what those messages told me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do decide to get into another relationship, I have like the awareness and the preparedness to like deconstruct with a partner. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that like, if there's any desire in me to have a relationship, like that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, yeah, and just that willingness to be openly communicative and have someone like call you out and be
Yes.
like, okay, I'm triggered as fuck, but I'm gonna like, I'm dedicated to working through this.
Right. But like then there's that element of like doing it from a space of love, and
Mm-hmm.
that's, you
Exactly.
know.
Yeah, and there's, it's like when you have like a connection, like two people who are conscious of their actions in the world, come together. It's like you're both, you know, you're both on the same side. There's none
Mhm.
of that like warring energetic of like I need to be right and it's like me against you. It's like you kind of merge as, again, it's like again with the consciousness merging. It's like Garrett and I are, we're so like, even though we have different interests and from the outside we can seem very different, we have the same like I don't know how to explain it. It's like we're the same person still.
Yes. No, it's like you guys are two sides of the same coin. You complement each other
Yeah.
so well. Like, where, I mean, like his interests and your interests are different, but like you said, like they fill up pieces of
Mhm.
like the consciousness that warps together.
Yeah. And even like relationships that we have that aren't like the one that Garrett, it's like the ones that you had in your past. Like again, I also believe that those are pre-contract, pre-agreed to before incarnation to like work on those realizations and on those specific puzzles with those people. But then and then you start thinking about like, okay, this is like a long game. Like the relationship that maybe the reason why Garrett and I don't have that many challenges in this lifetime is because we probably had to deal with like a lot. I mean, I have this like one really distinct like past life memory of losing him. Like we were, it was so interesting. That was like one of the most like vivid memory experiences. I was meditating on the dock like 2 years ago, and I like saw visuals. Like I basically felt like I was there, and that's like the one of the only times I've had that kind of experience where I could literally see, and it was just a snippet. It was really fast, but it was some sort of like um it was so interesting when I shared this because I'm like, that's so weird. But I was this like old woman, and it felt like I was a medicine woman in some sort of, it felt like a village or a tribe in the Amazon. And I had this like little hut, and I could see, like I had this little room, and I had like a corner of my hut was like all these like powders and herbs and all this stuff, which is why I was like, oh, I'm probably a medicine woman. But at the point that I had tapped into this self, I was like, I could even like look in at my hands, and they were like old lady hands, and I had like long gray hair, and it was tied in a braid. But simultaneously, like that version of me, like when I tapped into it, she was remembering this like lost love that she had in her youth, and then she never married again because she was just so committed to that person. Um, and when I like dove into that in like later meditations, the information that was coming through was about how it was like basically it's like Garrett and me, it's like our same, it's our consciousnesses, or like our, I don't know how it works, but like our stream of whatever makes me a region, whatever makes Garrett's soul Garrett, whatever, it was us too. But the lesson that needed to be learned was like individualization in that lifetime. So like I had to live a whole fucking lifetime without him so that I could individuate as myself. And I feel like now we're then when we met in this lifetime, it was like, oh, okay, we already did that. Now we get to be together, but we still have like solid identities as our own selves that don't get warped by one another's influence. Like I have my mission and my goals and my knowingness, and then you have yours, and then we can stay together. And but yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning on sharing that, but it's really yeah, like when you think of it like that, it's like, oh. And the fact that I have that memory and I can draw from it, and it's like, whoa, that's so weird. Most people would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But I'm just like, yeah, I mean,
No, that makes so much sense. It's literally like the journey you go through like with your soulmate and
mm-hmm,
apart from your soulmate. And like that's the I guess that's like the dichotomy of self and other, right? Um,
mm-hmm,
because a lot of times it's like I'm seeing like the yin and the yang symbol, and when you and him tap into each other now, it's like it's still like these solid colors, and you guys are
mm-hmm.
still your solid selves. um but prior to that lifetime where you had to learn like selfhood, it's like when you guys would tap into each other, like I'm seeing gray, just like one big swirling gray ball of like you
Mm,
can't tell which is which.
yeah. Yeah, and when I had like when I tapped into that memory 2 years ago, that was I was like really terrified that Garrett and I were gonna break up at that point. And I think that's why that memory came up to like
Oh.
remind me and like be like, oh no, don't worry, like you're like processing the trauma of that lifetime, and you're like scared because you experienced it already, that loss, and so now you're scared it's gonna happen again, but you already processed it, and so you can relax. And legit, like after I had that, I stopped fearing it.
Wow.
It was like
Holy
a
fuck.
healing, yeah.
That's crazy. Mm, I love that. I've
And then
definitely
sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Because I was gonna change the subject, so I want to hear what you're gonna say.
Yeah, it's like I'll talk to Garrett about it, and he still like doesn't have anything to say about it. He's like not, he doesn't like not believe it, but he doesn't believe it, so he's like very neutral on it, and I'm like, oh, interesting.
Ah,
because yeah,
the
like
agnostic unknown of just like
exactly.
accepting whatever truth could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's like his philosophy basically in general.
Anything could happen.
Yeah, he's just very Garrett's very like logical and grounded in the material reality. So he won't put his beliefs or he won't change his reality based on like concepts. He has to like see it to believe it, you know?
Mm. Okay, but like see it not like in his mind's eye, see it like see it here.
Yeah, yeah, and he'll agree like other realities could exist, but he's like it's irrelevant to him unless it's you know like he's very like grounded in his he has like tree energy basically. I say this to him all the time. Like the energy that you get from a tree like grounded, like that's what he embodies a lot of that. Which is
Yeah.
good for me because I'm just like floating.
Right. You are the air. You are the wind between his leaves.
Yeah, and the water and like I'm just constantly flowing and moving around and it's like coming back to Garrett is like the anchor point that grounds me into like some sort of stable life path.
Oh, I love that. I love the meshing of your guys' energies. It's like I think like that is like my favorite kind of like balance in a relationship is seeing somebody who's like very flowy and like out there in the world and somebody who is like here and like have like the anchor of the ship, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think that's just a really beautiful relationship dynamic.
And I think that it's so like traditionally like divine mask like we play out those parts so naturally just like the divine feminine divine masculine like the masculine's like the grounded like in the physical reality so I like really enjoyed that like learning about those dynamics because we like embody it like in a more like traditional way but we're still like empowered in it we're not in the wounded version of like the divine and divine feminine or we're not in the wounded version of like masculine feminine relationships that we've seen in like humanity in the past
Yeah.
but this always makes me curious because I know you've had experience with like different configurations of partnership so how do you like what's your experience if you feel called to share obviously you don't have to um, but just because like my relationship is very like structured in like the most traditional way like there's male energy female energy and I take as a female take on the flowy like feminine attributes and he as a male takes on the masculine attributes so how does it flow in non-traditional relationships and again you don't have to go into that if you don't want to.
So so when I was in a throuple, when I was dating three people, it was like it kind of almost felt like for a minute there when it first started, like I felt like the observer because the girl I was with was a great embodiment of the divine feminine and motherhood, and the male that we were with was just the opposite, was that divine masculine. And then it was like that kind of like started my question on like my gender identity, which that I can't really get into because that's a whole thing.
Yeah, I'm
um
curious about that at some point too, because I feel that percolating in your field, and I'm like, so, but I know it's like not ripe to talk about yet, so.
it's yeah, it's definitely there, but it's like I've got some layers to pull back before I can really understand and speak on that in a meaningful and effective way.
Hmm.
um but in that dynamic it was really interesting to like play with being the masculine and then playing the feminine and like seeing what it was like to play both at once, and then like I could see that kind of bleed into them, and I think that's something that they'd played with already in their relationship before I kind of, you know, came along. So I mean that opened up a lot of doors for me moving into relationships after that, and in my relationship with myself once that ended.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next relationship I had after that, it was the partner I was with really embodied divine feminine. And because I was in just such a curious state, I was like, okay, I'll play masculine. Um, And I remember having an acid trip with them, and like I just really saw them as like like divine femininity and like freedom and flowing, and I was like, I felt like the anchor and like the divine masculine, which was so out of character for me. um and like the archetypes we were playing was like, she was like this artist and this singer, and she was an artist and a singer, and I like saw myself as like this New York like producer. Like during the whole trip, it was like the goofiest thing. So cartoonish. Everything I think is always cartoonish. But then the relationship I kind of had after that was with somebody who I was with, like really close friends with for a couple of years, and he really embodied masculinity. And after that relationship, I was very much like exploring my femininity, and that was when I did a lot of acid. I was in my spiritual psychosis, was figuring all of that out, and like while we were trying to have that relationship, he was like a little too grounded. He definitely tried to understand where I was coming from, but it was a lot for anyone to take, and so we kind of broke things off, and that was like a whole twin flame journey. That was, and I think that's what kind of like, that relationship triggered the fuck out of me and like showed me all of like my mirrored toxic traits that had come up in my relationships beforehand. um and then since that one kind of ended, it's really just been me. Like I've tried to explore relationships with other people, but it's not, I know I'm going to end up in another relationship, but it's not ripe yet. And it really feels like any relationship I end up in this lifetime is a temporary building block. Like I'm very much self actualizing right now, and becoming a sustainable self, and like healing from codependency. And beyond that, that's just what it looks like, I guess, for me. I hope that
No, it does.
that tangent
And
made
I
sense.
reflecting back to you, like you're someone that you just embody the balance. I feel like with what you just said, like shared about your exploration with like the yin and yang energies, if we're like talking about it in a dual, because I feel like we're also beginning to just on in this realm beginning to dissolve duality in general, but like because that's been our history of duality, it's like you're someone that has played with both embodiments, plus like your fluidity with like being an actor and like being into like hop in and out of identities and things like that. I feel like you're when I speak to you, or like when I'm in your presence, you carry, I see that you carry both of them in such a balanced way. And it's really cool because I feel like you're the only person that I've met that's seems to have mastered that level of balance within themselves in a really like grounded, stable way. So you hold this like deep grounded presence that I feel from like masculine, like from the masculine energy, like the, yeah, just like the anchor. But then I also like am able to just like flow with you on all the like crazy spiritual things, and you know what I mean. So you're someone that like, as when I speak to you and like when I'm near you, you you already have such a mastery over it, which is really really cool to witness.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I think subconsciously, like that was my biggest goal going through all of my relationships, but specifically like those last three I was in. And even though the pendulum was like swinging, um, I think I'm finally finding like that balance, and I'm able to trust in that. Um, and discovering what that's defined as is, it, I don't know, it just almost feels a little bit absurd to try to define it as any gender, whether that be non-binary, because that doesn't necessarily feel right, because I definitely feel feminine, but feminine doesn't necessarily feel right because I definitely feel masculine. But you know, it's like all of that's all happening at once. So I'm like, honestly, anybody could call me whatever they want, and I'll just, like, I don't feel dysphoric in any of it. You know, it's like the
Yeah.
opposite of what I've heard a lot of other people say, which
Yeah.
is like they have a really strong gender dysphoria, whereas I'm like, I don't feel anything as dysphoric. which just feels insane.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot to hold, but that's like ultimate freedom. Right? And I also sense that like I feel like different parts of or like the different embodiment comes up based on the context you're in, based on the people that you're around. Like I do feel that when we're in conversation, like I feel like you are that like masculine. I feel like you hold more of the like masculine energy just in relation with my like feminine because I feel so grounded and anchored by you. But then I can also see like of Selene that's like very embodied in femininity. So I feel like maybe you're just. Have you ever like looked into human design?
I a little bit, a little bit.
Do you know
I
what your
took
type is?
the test and I am a generator.
Oh, interesting. So I
Yeah.
was talking about that because there's this one type called reflectors, and I haven't done research in it, but I was curious. I was like, oh, maybe, but there's anyway, regardless of human design, but it feels like that. It's like when you have that like ultimate freedom of being able to access and embody all those energies, then it just becomes like in every moment what feels right for you to be. Right? And you don't have to define yourself as one or the other. It's like whatever the moment brings forth.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I think what I'm healing right now, like what I'm actually processing that we were talking about before is the frustration and kind of allowing myself to do that, because I feel like
Mm.
there's this part of me that's like, I have to control who I am and be quote unquote consistent
Mm-hmm.
and who I am all the time. And when I try to shove myself into that box, it's like I can stay there for a while, but then I start to get claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to break out and I just want to flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just see you like you're like I'm here to like taste like just taste and flow and experience like everything. Like you don't need to. Yeah. That's so interesting. I loved digging into that a little bit because I just find that so it's so cool. And again just goes into that same like the same theme that you process in acting and just being able to put on the dress and the identities of the different things that you want to experience. I mean, that kind of like flows into like my longing too of wanting to just be able to do that because I feel like I'm more like compared to you at least like more consistent in my like embodiment of those types of energies like the feminine, etc. So maybe that's like where my longing comes from like, oh, what if I wasn't in this like container as a reed and I was just more fluid? Like, what would that be like? That's interesting too.
Yes. I Now that you're telling me all of this, I'm like, I've got all of these acting exercises that are like bleeding to the forefront of my mind that if you ever like, you want to play around with it, like I would definitely be down to do that with you.
Oh my gosh.
Didn't, you
That
know.
feels exciting, but it feels like huge.
But if
Yeah.
you feel inspired to do it, just hit me up. I got
Yeah,
them.
I will.
They're
Yeah.
they're
Now
right there for you.
that door is like right there and it's like I can just open it whenever I want. So I likely will take you up on that cuz I'm starting to actually really develop an interest in acting and I'm like that's so like I said it's so new to me as a concept of me doing that, but yeah, it just feels really cool to play with. Yeah.
We have been we have gone all over like each other's mind maps today. And I love it so much.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like I really got an insight into how you think and how you experience the world. It's really cool.
Yeah, same.
Well, thank you.
You.
I'm gonna
Thank you.
close it out now before we go all day.
Yeah, I know, right? Before we go on
Well,
until
it's been two
tomorrow.
hours. That's cool. Yeah. But that was really. I'm gonna now try to like record an intro trying to like cover and summarize what we just talked about. So wish me luck. But thank you so much, Celine, for hanging out with me and spending time in this space. And I just love that it flowed so well and that I don't know, you just bring out every time I talk to someone it's like they bring out specific sides of me And I'm like so grateful for the side of me that you bring out, especially like with all the multi-reality stuff, which I always am like trying to find a way to talk about more.
Same.
So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do you have any last words?
I would just like to take a moment to express how absolutely full my heart is right now, and just like how every conversation that I have with you is just so energizing, and is like, it like reminds me of the passion I have for this reality that like I so often forget. So thank you for, you know, just being that inspiration all the time.
Thank you. That's such an what an honor to receive a compliment like that. Because that is what I like, that's the purpose of me ever showing up like online or sharing anything. Like just bringing people back into their like why you came here in the first place, like reminding yourself of that, even if we don't know the specifics, like just the energy. It's like, okay, there's a part of me somewhere that wanted to be here.
Yes.
So it's cool to like have like you actually say that. I'm like, okay, it's working. My intentions are working. But thank you. Okay,
I love
I'm gonna
you
hit
so
recording. I mean, I'm gonna stop recording, and I love you too. Oh, and before we go, what's your necklace stone?
My necklace, this is sunstone. I found a crystal shop like an hour away from where I live because I just drive around and do that sometimes.
Yeah.
And this rock specifically was like yelling at me from across the floor. So here I am wearing
Wow.
it all the time.
I haven't like played with crystals in a long time, but just like last week, there's this one stone malachite that just needs, it just keeps calling me. And it's so funny in town. I live in a small town right now, and there's a fried chicken shop, and the lady just sells fried chicken but also sells crystals. It's really weird. It's really weird. Like it's like a fried chicken store, and then she has like a crystal display. So like I went to her it's so funny though, because it just doesn't make sense, but then it's just so, you just appreciate it so much because you're like, she doesn't give a fuck.
Nope. She said fuck these rules.
Yeah, and so I went in
Like
and I was
some
like, do you have
rock
malachite? And she's like, no, but I'm gonna get some, so I have to like call her on Monday. But yeah, that stone really wants to be in my world, so that's fun.
That is exciting. Malachite is a very attracting stone. Like it'll bring in whatever your energy is, you know, asking for. So
It came up, sorry, I know we're gonna talk forever, but malachite came up because I started playing with I think I told you about this, but when I started playing around with the idea of doing in-person facilitating, like in-person group circles and things like that, when I was doing the mood board for it, because I like doing that whenever a new offering comes through, like on Pinterest, I'll just like try to materialize the vibe, because I was saying like I have like the raw energy of it, but then I'll create like a Pinterest mood board to kind of like make it a little bit more tangible and easy to grasp, and malachite just kept coming up, so related to that experience. So yeah, I'm excited.
Is super exciting. That's so cool.
Yeah, I love how magical reality is now for me. It never used to be this way, but now everything's like a sign and everything's a synchronicity, and I'm just being led, and there's breadcrumbs everywhere, and it just feels so like good. Yeah.
I know. This is like the most high definition video game I've ever played, and I love
Yeah.
it. This is the best.
Legit. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And let's end there. That's perfect ending.
Yes, perfect.
I'm literally just gonna, I don't know what to title this, but I'm probably gonna just title it Life is a Video Game.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah. All right. I love you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much,
Well,
Selene.
I love you too. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And see you around in our chat, in our liberated chat, and in our one-on-one space. And yay, I love you.
Okay, I love you too.
Bye.
Bye.